Hello, I'm Glenda Adkisson with the Paducah area chapter of the American Red Cross, and today we're going to be discussing earthquakes because of where we live. Certainly that is a concern to many of us in this area, and I'm glad to have with me today Lori King. Lori King is the State Program Manager for Earthquake Preparedness, and Lori, we're so happy to have you with us today.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm really happy to be here to discuss earthquakes. It is a major topic and concern to a lot of citizens throughout our area, so I'm really happy to be here.
Can you tell us a little bit about why we need to be concerned in this area in particular? Many people that are from this area or have read much or studied much about the geography here understand that we are near a fault line. But there are a lot of things that play into that, a lot of factors that people in the community may not be aware of. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Exactly. A lot of people are aware of the major earthquakes that happened in 1811 and 1812 because those were the big major earthquakes that occurred. But there are quakes that happen along the New Madrid seismic zone all the time. And we actually have hundreds of quakes every year that occur on that seismic zone, but they're so small that we don't necessarily feel them. So the seismic zone is very, very active, but the normal citizen, we don't normally really realize it if we're not just really plugged into it because we don't feel those quakes. So it's very important to remember that the seismic zone is there and it is still an active seismic zone, and we do need to be prepared for an earthquake to occur because the threat does still exist for an earthquake to occur here in western Kentucky.
Now, is the New Madrid fault the only one that we're concerned about in this area?
No, we actually have another fault on the Wabash Valley line that runs up through Indiana, actually. And there, surprisingly enough, is another fault that runs up through eastern Tennessee, which is kind of a threat up through eastern Kentucky as well. So that's also a concern for the state.
Now, as far as the one that might most likely, or the one that currently has the most seismic activity, which one are we most concerned about at this point?
Well, really they all are kind of a concern, to be honest with you. They're all a concern, but for this end of the state, obviously our biggest concern is the New Madrid seismic zone, and that's just simply because of the proximity. Also the Wabash is a threat, but our biggest concern is the New Madrid seismic zone.
Back in 1811, 1812, this certainly was a historical event, but if you look at the top 10 disasters within the United States, it's not listed as one of those top 10. And looking at the population, there weren't as many people in this area. So not as many people were affected by that earthquake. Today, if that same earthquake had happened today, what would have been the difference?
It's really interesting to look at it because, as you said, it was a very, very small population in the western Kentucky and the 8-state area around the New Madrid seismic zone. It just wasn't very populated at that time. Not a lot of infrastructure, obviously, in the 1800s. It was very, very sparsely populated in this area. And so not a lot of people lived here. They didn't feel the earthquake. There are some accounts, some written accounts of the earthquake, but just not very many. So even though the people that lived here were greatly affected by the earthquakes, and there were several, it wasn't just one big quake, there were many, many aftershocks and several very large quakes that happened in that series of earthquakes that occurred. It was a lot different then than it would be now, and that's putting it very mildly, because what happened then affected very few people because it just wasn't very populated. But what would occur now would be just vastly different because we are a lot more populated. Obviously, the cities of Memphis and St. Louis would be drastically affected. Major pipelines run through the area now, the highways, the bridges, the major infrastructure we have that affects a lot of the rest of the country that runs through our area. The interstate system, as I said, the gas pipelines that run through the area that run and supply the rest of the country would be affected. And obviously the people that live here would be greatly affected. We're a lot more populated. A lot more people in general would be affected. So we're looking at a whole different scenario now than we were looking at back in the 1800s.
I know that as far as infrastructure, there are new guidelines in place, new earthquake standards in place. What year was that was put in the any new construction after what date? has to be up to those earthquake standards.
It's really interesting because the state of Kentucky had an earthquake commission that was put into effect. I believe it was back in the 1980s, and that commission was very active, and they worked really hard to get state agencies together, engineers together, the Engineers Association, Home Builders Associations, everybody worked together to get those codes up to standard. And after that date, those codes had to be abided by with construction. And actually that committee, we're working really hard to get that committee back up and running again where it should be. And the state is working really hard to do that. And those people are coming together again to make sure that we are where we need to be with our damage assessments if we were to have an earthquake today, making sure that we have teams to go out there and assess our bridges, assess our roads, assess buildings to ensure that they are safe for people to go into and things like that. So that actual committee that made that happen is still up and running, and we are working on getting that committee not only up and running as it was then, but also working on some future projects to do really cool things that, as the building codes that they did then. They work on really important projects like that.
You mentioned bridges. Mm-hmm. Can you speak to what kind of shape our bridges are in? What is the standard, and how close are we to being at that safe standard with our bridges in the area?
Some work was actually done back again in the 80s on the bridges. Some mitigation projects have been done. Mitigation is really important because those are projects that are actually done, and a lot of them are funded by FEMA to help us get prepared, to basically help construct things, prepare for things so that we can make them more safe before the earthquake happens. And some mitigation was done to some of our bridges in western Kentucky to make them safer before the earthquake actually happens. So some mitigation measures were taken to some of our major bridges back in years past. So some of our bridges have had mitigation done to them, and they have been mitigated. That is something else that the state committee is working on, is assessing some of our bridges and looking at them again to see, do we need to apply for some more mitigation dollars and things like that. Also, our state transportation cabinet is on a committee that is working with the 8 state Central United States Earthquake Consortium Transportation Committee. And that consortium is made up of the 8 states around the New Madrid seismic zone, and they work really closely together to work on these exact issues, transportation issues, bridge issues, road issues that would occur during an earthquake. So the state of Kentucky and the Transportation Department is really, really active in issues regarding our transportation during an earthquake.
Lori, several times you've mentioned when the earthquake happens, and you don't mention at all, you've not worded it as if we have another earthquake. You continually say when that earthquake happens. Scientists are predicting, I think it's by the year 2040, that the likelihood, if I read this correctly, and correct me if I'm wrong, that the likelihood of having another earthquake at the same scale on the Richter scale as the one in 1811, 1812 is, I think they said 90% chance by, or something like that, but certainly very likely within the next 30, 40 years. Of course we don't know, but because of the seismic activity, can you predict that there will be one in the near future, or any time within the next 50 years, for example?
The United States Geological Survey has put out some statistics on likelihoods of how likely it would be that we would have a 6.0 or a 7.0 earthquake. We can't really obviously predict exactly. There are some percentages out there, some statistics out there that the Geological Survey did put out. Those are, kind of controversial. Some people say, yeah, that's likely. Some say no. Everybody agrees that it is going to happen eventually. We will have an earthquake eventually that will be felt, that will cause damage. Whether it will be a 6.0, a 7.0, what it will be, nobody knows. But the key to it all is being prepared, for our responders to be prepared, and perhaps even more importantly than that is our citizens being prepared. That is the key to all of it. The seismic zone is active. It's very active. And we do know, as I've been saying, and as you said, it's not if, it's just when it's going to occur. A small earthquake, or what we consider small, a 5.0, a 6.0, would cause a ton of damage. It's not just the 7.0s that we're afraid of, it's those smaller earthquakes as well that could cause a lot of destruction in our area, especially here in the Jackson Purchase area. So we need to be very aware of that, and we need to make sure that our citizens have their supply kits ready and that they are prepared. They have food and water, non-perishable food items, water, batteries, radios, those types of things, so that their families are prepared for it as any kind of disaster, not just an earthquake. If they're basically prepared for a catastrophic earthquake, they'll be prepared for any type of disaster, and that's the key.
Well, and you know, Lori, that's something at the American Red Cross that we deal with all the time.
Right.
What we are working for and what our major push has been over the past year is preparedness for whatever comes your way. And what we want to do is get people away from thinking, okay, if there's a large disaster, then something may come up, so I'll hoard up all this food. If you know there's a snowstorm coming in, if you know, people rush to the grocery store, they get all those supplies and they go home, and then when it is over, they sort of forget about it. What we want to do at the Red Cross is get people thinking and preparing for for the chance of disaster or an event in the same way that they would when they go out to their car, simply put on their seatbelt. It becomes a habit. We want them to have a preparedness kit in their car, in their home, so that at a moment's notice, if you needed to get out of your home, if you got stuck on the highway, you would have what you need. A lot of people, and I've heard them say this, they'll make a comment, well, you know, if an earthquake happens or a big tornado comes through, it may get me and there's really not anything I can do. But when you back that up just a bit and think, well, what if it doesn't affect me that much? What if it only affects my need for getting my ability to travel to the grocery store? Mm-hmm. Or what if I'm in my home and my home's okay, everything's good, but my water's shut off, maybe just for a day or two, maybe my power is out for 24 hours, then how well will we be prepared? Can my family be comfortable? Will my children be okay? What if something happens and your kids are at school and you can't get in touch with each other because your cell phones aren't working? Maybe there's a cell phone tower down. In reality, most of us just feel lost without our phone now or without the internet, because has become our way of life. So certainly that is what we want people to do, is just kind of be prepared as a habit. Now, on the side of the American Red Cross, we don't operate quite that way, because as your department, we focus also on the event and the likelihood that something major is going to happen. So what kind of things is your department, as the program manager, earthquake manager for the state of Kentucky, what are you doing for the likelihood that something large would happen, besides helping the community know that they need to make a preparedness kit on a larger scale? If that happens, what plans are you all working on? And certainly you may want to even speak to the things that we're working together on as far as the Red Cross.
Exactly. There are a lot of things going on right now in the state of Kentucky with the earthquake program. We are really working hard to get the earthquake program vamped up, really revitalized. Earthquake is one of those things that it tends to kind of go into the back of people's minds. With tornadoes, severe storms, snowstorms, ice storms, floods, that tends to kind of go in the forefront a lot because we have those every so often. Every now and then we'll have a destructive tornado, unfortunately, that hits a town in Kentucky, or we'll have a flood. Earthquakes, we don't often have those that people feel, so they don't think about them. And we're fortunate because of that. But in a way, it kind of pushes to the back of people's minds because people don't think about earthquake because we don't have those. So it's something that we have to remind folks of. You need to be prepared because it could be very catastrophic. So we're trying to keep the awareness out there. That's one thing that we're working on. We just finished an earthquake preparedness week. The governor declared that week. That happened back in February. That's something that we did several activities on. We had a couple of trainings during that week with our responders. We did a non-structural mitigation class, which helped to teach people how to prepare their homes and their buildings, their businesses, their offices, things like that for an earthquake. We also did a class, an Earthquake 101 class, which was an overall class talking about earthquakes in general. We also do every year an earthquake drill with the schools statewide, and that's part of that week. All the kids in the schools in Kentucky do an earthquake drill, and the kids do their duck cover and hold drill every year, just to remind them how to do that, because that's very, very critical that they do. So we did that and had great success with that drill. So that's one thing that we've done. The other thing that we're working on is, again, the earthquake committee statewide. And that's something that we've met twice within the last year, since actually last November. So we've met twice in the last 6 months. And that committee is made up of state agencies that have anything at all to do with earthquake mitigation, preparedness, or response. So any of your state agencies that you normally think of, such as emergency management, your nonprofits, the Engineers Associations, Kentucky State Police, the Transportation Cabinet, Homeland Security, any of the agencies on the state level that you would normally think of that would have anything at all to do with a response or a recovery or preparedness for earthquake, sit on that state committee. And we've been meeting in Frankfort, and we've had wonderful participation and enthusiasm from that group. So we're getting that group back together again and revitalizing that group. And it's went very, very well, and we're working really hard, as I said earlier, to get some things going on the state level, getting some new things revitalized with that. And probably our biggest project right now that we're working on the state level is writing a catastrophic earthquake plan for the New Madrid Fault. And I know the Red Cross has been very, very active in that, and that's something that has really grown. It's actually a FEMA-funded effort. FEMA has funded, and our federal legislature has funded this effort for all 8 states around the New Madrid Seismic Zone to write a catastrophic earthquake plan. And Kentucky is obviously part of that effort. And what we focused on, we started out with the counties in Kentucky Emergency Management Areas 1, 2, and 3, which is basically the Jackson Purchase area here in far western Kentucky, all the way up to basically Owensboro. And we've asked each county in those areas to write a catastrophic earthquake plan. What are you going to do if we have a major 7.7 earthquake? And that's what we're considering our worst case scenario. You have to have something to base your plan on. So we're using a 7.7 earthquake on the New Madrid Seismic Zone, and we've given them a scenario for that. And they're writing a plan based on that scenario. And then from that, we're writing a state catastrophic earthquake plan. And a couple of weeks ago, we had a state workshop based on that, and we pulled a lot of ideas out of that. We had around 250 participants at that workshop, and it was a great success. The Red Cross was very active in that. And we met in breakout groups and discussed a lot of issues such as damage assessment, transportation, housing, a lot of different issues, health and medical, security, a lot of different things, to discuss these issues and gaps that we can fill in our plans, resources we may need, personnel we may need, and things that we need to be sure to include in our plans, things that we know we're going to need to request from the federal government, and things that they need to include in their plans. Because the next step of that planning effort is that the federal government is going to take all of our 8 state plans, and they're going to write their own plan. So they're going to take what we've written, look at it, identify our own gaps, things that we're going to need, and they're going to write a federal New Madrid Seismic Zone plan. So it's a really big planning effort that the state of Kentucky has really grabbed onto, and the local governments have really grabbed onto. It's been a huge success, and we had great participation a couple of weeks ago at our workshop. And it's just evolving from there. From that effort, when the federal workshop is completed and the federal plan is completed, we will be holding an exercise in the year 2011, a full-scale catastrophic earthquake exercise. And all 8 states are slated right now to participate in that catastrophic earthquake exercise. So that's going to be a really big, huge effort that FEMA is right now working on with us, and also CUSEC, the Central United States Earthquake Consortium, to get that up and going. So that's a big effort. So that's our major effort right now, is writing this plan. We have a plan now, but we're trying to make it better.
Well, and Lori, you mentioned a while ago that if you are prepared for an earthquake of that magnitude, you can pretty much handle any other disaster that comes your way. At the Red Cross, we are doing the same thing. And as you mentioned, we did participate in the recent workshop and focused on housing, because there will be people that are displaced. If you have flooding, as we do in the spring in this area, often people are displaced from their homes, maybe just for a day or two. Depends on how much damage they have. Sometimes it's longer. But you will have people displaced. So we are focusing on housing. And within the community, sometimes people look at it and they think, well, okay, FEMA's taking care of this, and Homeland Security's taking care of this piece of it, and they are doing this. And sometimes they get into the thought that, well, I don't really need to do anything because they're out there working on it. When in reality, if there is something, a disaster that comes through, for example, a tornado, the most likely person to come to your rescue if you have rubble laying on top of you is your next door neighbor. And that is something that people need to think about, because if we are all trained in CPR, first aid, for example, it is such a short window to be able to give someone CPR and give them an opportunity to live should they be in that kind of situation, that we as neighbors need to have CPR, first aid. We need to be trained in those things. Those are things that are very, very simple to do. Having that first aid kit, so that if you had a neighbor that was lying there bleeding and in a catastrophic event, you're not likely to get someone to your home within the first few minutes. It may be delayed because there would be so much going on. And so that's an important thing to think about. From there, certainly, having the CPR, the first aid, those kind of immediate things, then going into that plan, and of course with the Red Cross, where do we put people? You know, having volunteers that are trained, and Lori, I think you are aware, because we work together enough, that you're aware that we have trained volunteers that have gone through sometimes 70, 75, 80 hours of courses just to get the basic courses out of the way. But they learn how to do disaster assessment, mass care feeding, all of those things, and they come together, and certainly within the community, anyone that's interested in helping our effort can come to the American Red Cross, they can volunteer, and we underwrite the cost of all their training. And so other areas that you see, what would you add to that as far as things that on your end that you would need us to do?
It's very important, as you said, because there are only so many of us responders and our local responders out there. So personal preparedness is very critical, and as you said, that first person that's going to probably come to your rescue are your neighbors. So the Red Cross is very, very critical, and I just you know, add on to what you said. It's critical for people to be active in their communities, learn those basics, be prepared in your own home to take care of your own family. It starts at home, having a family preparedness kit. Having those basics at your house, stashed away in a closet or in your garage somewhere. Have your stuff that you would need to take care of your own family first. Having a family preparedness plan. If you go to the Red Cross website, redcross.org, it's all right there. It outlines it for you on what you need to have. We refer people to that all the time, and it's all outlined for you there. That's the basics. And then from there, if you want to get more actively involved, getting involved with the Red Cross, with your local CERT teams, your local Medical Reserve Corps. There are all kinds of ways you can get involved to help even on a larger scale, and that is critical because we're going to need all the help we can get on the responder level for a catastrophic event, and the Red Cross is a great tool for that. So, you know, we're always asking for volunteers, people to get further trained beyond the personal preparedness level. We hope that everybody does that. That's an optimistic goal, we know, but we hope that everybody gets prepared on the personal level and gets their families prepared. But then beyond that, we want everybody that has any interest at all to get training with the Red Cross or other organizations in order to help out in their communities, because it is going to be a critical piece to this whole overall preparedness effort and response effort when we have a catastrophic event.
Well, Lori, one thing that I would certainly want the community to know and understand is that the local American Red Cross chapter is community funded. We do not receive funds from the National American Red Cross. Mm-hmm. Certainly there are many benefits because we are with the National American Red Cross. If we have a catastrophic event here in our community, the National American Red Cross will come in, they'll send volunteers in, they'll help underwrite the cost of that. But what we do on a daily basis, training our volunteers, going out and getting shelter agreements, for example, of course, these are all community funded. And so that's something that I always like to let the community know, is that if individually or as companies, people would remember to support financially, you know, the Red Cross. That is such an important piece of this, so that we can train volunteers, and that is so helpful. And then, of course, I always like to end our shows with just reminding people to be individually prepared. For example, making a kit, which is those things that you would need to keep you and your family comfortable for. We try to encourage you to be prepared for 3 days: water, food, flashlights, batteries, those things that you would need for the first 3 days. And that may depend on you and your family. It may depend, you may need pet food if you have a pet. Certainly medications are very important, but make a kit, make a plan. All of us need to have a plan. If communications are down, what are you and your family going to do? Where are you going to plan to meet if you can? You know, what are the things that you and your family need to have in place? So that is the plan. And then be informed. Be informed about how to be safe. For example, don't drive through floodwaters. You know, what should you do in case of a tornado? What should you do just if the power's out? What do your children know to do in case of a fire? What are those things that you need to do? And then where do you find out your information? Certainly, Lori, can you give us what the state would do as far as getting information out should we have a major event and people need to hear, for example, where to go for shelters or what they should do?
Sure. The state is plugged into the emergency alert system. One very critical piece that we always try to get out there is it's very important to have your weather alert radios. And we always plug the weather alert radios because those are able to be operated off of a simple battery. So if the power is out, it's very critical that you have one of those, because now we can even send all kinds of emergency alerts over those, not just weather alerts. So if you have a weather alert radio, those are very important, and we can set alerts off over those. Also, obviously, we'll use your regular media outlets. If those are out, we will get creative if we need to. But we do have a public information officer. We will all work together among agencies to get the word out to the public, and the Kentucky Division of Emergency Management is committed to that, to make sure that the word gets out on where shelters are and how to protect yourself, and all the appropriate information you will need to keep you and your family safe. And we will take whatever means we need to do that.
Well, Lori, thank you for being with us today, and thank you for all the work that you all are doing, because it truly is benefiting our entire community. And thank you for being with us today. I would encourage you, as members of the community, to be informed, to learn more about the things that you need to know to keep you and your family safe. And certainly you are always welcome to join the American Red Cross. And thanks again for being with us today.